Good morning. It's 7 o'clock on Wednesday, the 20th of March. The news headlines this morning.
There are moments in the life of any cabinet minister when you possess knowledge which will have a significant effect on the lives of very large numbers of people.
Ministry of Agriculture officials are to have urgent talks about the evidence of a possible link between mad cow disease and a brain illness in humans.
On the 20th of March 1996, I was given advice of a new threat to the nation's health, and I knew I needed to make a statement to the country.
I'd helped prepare this statement to reassure the public, but I'm thinking, this disease transmits to humans. Jesus wept. Now we're in deep shit.
In 1996, a lethal new disease appeared in Britain.
Patients present with difficulties with balance and walking. And the deterioration from first symptom to death takes only a matter of months.
Untreatable and incurable. It has cost the health service over £1 billion and claimed almost 200 lives.
I didn't think she would die. You just can't think that. I couldn't think of a time when she wouldn't be there.
What makes this epidemic unusual is that it is entirely man-made.
It is a devastating indictment of British government, probably one of the worst examples of British misgovernment since the war.
This basically says murdered by greed and corruption.
With more victims still expected, this is the story of Britain's biggest ever food scandal.
Statement, Mr. Secretary.
If you says to me 11 years ago that my son was going to die of this horrendous disease, no, I would not have believed you. I would not have believed you. I couldn't have believed you. I would not have believed that they would have put infected food substances out into the world for human consumption. I thought that the government and the food industry were there to look after us. That did not happen, and the tragedy is that Grant is now dead. This thing was totally avoidable if the proper actions had been taken by the people that were in charge 30 years ago.
A mysterious brain disease is threatening the country's cows. Scientists don't know what's causing it or where it came from, but they are worried. So far, nearly 100 cows have had to be slaughtered before the disease kills them.
32 years ago, scientists reported a new disease on a farm in Wiltshire.
The disease that we'd found was bovine spongiform encephalopathy, or BSE, mad cow disease. It was clearly different from most viruses that we were familiar with.
This is no ordinary infection. Some scientists believe that it breaks some of the laws of nature as we know them, and thus may be a novel form of life.
The cattle were clearly neurologically disturbed. They became erratic in behavior, a lot of trembling, not being able to walk steadily. Gradually, the nervous system degenerates. The brain becomes a bit like a sponge in appearance, and death inevitably ensues.
With new cases coming in at a rate of over 200 a week, no one disputes it is a dangerous disease.
Scientists have never discovered where BSE came from, but within a year, it had swept across the country.
Already, BSE has spread to more than 50 herds in 14 counties.
We went from the odd isolated case to as many as almost 1,000 cases a week.
So far, 13,000 cases have been identified on 6,000 farms.
Beef sales plummeted as the epidemic spread.
I certainly don't believe that beef's okay, and I certainly won't feed it to my children. The £2 billion meat industry is expecting lean times ahead. An opinion poll yesterday found that a quarter of households had dropped beef from the family menu.
It was worrying for the cattle industry. We weren't absolutely sure how it was being transmitted. We had to get on top of that to try and stop the epidemic.
Scientists eventually discovered that cows were contracting BSE from a cattle feed, which contained one infectious ingredient.
You may not have realized, but for 40 years we've been processing the unwanted remains of cattle, sheep, pigs and chickens and feeding it back to them with other food.
In the 1980s, farmers were under pressure from the food industry to produce beef quickly and cheaply.
The main product is dried and emerges as a coarse brown powder. This is meat and bone meal.
Meat and bone meal was a protein-rich feed made from rendered-down cattle carcasses.
Now, on this diet, these animals grow very rapidly indeed.
BSE spread because infected cows were being made into meat and bone meal and fed to other cows. An epidemic caused by turning cattle into cannibals.
Should we have forced herbivores to become carnivores? And is BSE nature's revenge?
I was running a think tank at the time, looking at the food industry. Independent people like myself and the colleagues I worked with at the time actually thought this was shocking. British farming was being squeezed by the huge food manufacturing sector to produce more for less. And that accelerated the need for farmers to get everything they could out of every animal. I thought it was risky at the time. I still think it was scandalous.
In July 1988, the government banned meat and bone meal. But by then, over 1 million infected cows had entered the human food chain.
The Agriculture and Food Minister, John Gummer, has said there's no evidence that humans are at risk from BSE or mad cow disease.
I therefore have no hesitation in saying that beef can be eaten safely by everyone, both adults and children, including patients in hospital.
When I first became minister, the consensus was that it was a disease of cows. We certainly had no evidence of a threat to people. Indeed, rather the opposite. It was expected that this was a very remote possibility.
The Ministry of Agriculture believed beef was safe because BSE had a similar effect on the brain as a sheep disease called scrapie. People had eaten scrapie-infected sheep for centuries without getting ill.
Scrapie is a disease that works by getting into the nervous system and causing the neurological symptoms that we're familiar with BSE. And because sheep scrapie had never posed a risk to humans, the assumption was for BSE that it would behave in a similar way and not readily jump species. That was an assumption.
The advert in all today's national papers doesn't leave much room for doubt. And the Meat and Livestock Commission says there should be none about British beef.
You can guarantee then that any beef sold in our shops in Britain today is safe to eat?
Of course, absolute guarantee.
The Ministry of Agriculture threw itself into rescuing the beef trade.
The agricultural sector was an important part of our economy. These were people whose support and encouragement I wanted.
Tonight, MPs dined early on the terrace of the House to help the farmers' cause, eating steak tartare, raw meat, to show that British beef still goes down a treat.
Okay, kids, what do you want?
Hamburger and chips, please. Cheeseburger and chips. Cheeseburger and chips. Hamburger and chips.
Beef was a multi-billion-pound industry that had grown in the 1980s as demand skyrocketed.
I'm just going to have a word about bolognese sauce, and this is made with finely minced beef. It's got to be really thick to really coat the spaghetti.
Food manufacturers were developing new techniques to cash in on the meat craze.
When you kill an animal, you take bits of meat off, they're separated into the prime bits and the less prime bits. At the end, you're just left with brains and spinal cords and the central nervous system, basically. What the food industry realized in the 1980s was there was big profit to be made from this. If you sort of pressure cook it, you get a sludge of meat-like stuff called mechanically recovered meat that the regulators allowed to go in to meat products, meat pies, sausages, without being declared.
The public weren't told about mechanically recovered meat, nor that it contained spinal cord, the most contagious part of a BSE-infected carcass. School children were particularly at risk because of radical changes the Conservatives had made to school dinners.
In 1980, Margaret Thatcher's government passed the Education Act, which both privatised school meals and removed the need for school meals to have any nutritional value. The Education Act 1944 stipulated that school meals should provide 50% of a child's nutrition. After the war, that had been watered down to being 33% of a child's nutrient intake needs, and the Education Act abolished it altogether. School children were getting an increased exposure to BSE because school meals became about feeding kids for as little cost as possible. The Thatcher government believed in that, said, let the market rip. Public policy has no place in this. Oh, wow, was that a mistake.
By 1990, a whole generation were unknowingly eating meat contaminated with BSE.
I look at every photograph of Claire at a birthday party, surrounded by a mound of sausage rolls and sausages on sticks. And you just think, is that the one? Was it then? You're supposed to keep your child safe. You think about, are they getting good nutrition? You know, are they eating enough? Are they eating too much? And yet, I gave her something, or allowed her to eat something, which killed her. And, yeah, I think about it all the time.
We just bought what we could afford. Just stuff that wasn't expensive, but you could make a lot of it, feed the kids and feed us. And you believe the government.
Of course you did.
They were the government, you trusted them, everyone trusted the government. You know, never thinking that this sort of thing would happen. You did trust them.
There are new claims that unacceptable risks are being taken in the BSE epidemic.
By the spring of 1990, a young microbiologist in York was beginning to question whether beef was completely safe.
Dr. Steve Dealer says the official view that there's no risk to humans by eating red meat is not borne out by his research work.
In the early 90s, I decided to have a look at BSE. I found that this disease was not acting in the same way as scrapie. It was as if it was a new disease. There had been some experiments carried out, and what they found was that Some animals couldn't be infected with scrapie, but could be infected with BSE.
The concentrated, purified extracts of diseased animal brains are deadly. A single drop injected into a laboratory animal produces the disease.
That meant we couldn't be sure it wouldn't have the ability to transfer to humans. And so I decided to speak out.
Well, unfortunately, this is a fatal disease with no method of treatment, no method of adequate diagnosis, which is passed from one species to another. I don't really think, at the moment, that there is no risk from beef.
The government have told us that meat is safe.
We don't know how big the risk is. We know that we'll have eaten about 1.8 million infected cattle by the year 2001. We've eaten about 1.5 million already. After I spoke out, I got moved from a research lab to places where I couldn't carry out further research. People in power would much rather do their best to help farmers.
Those who are scaremongering not only harm the agricultural industry, but they do great harm to individuals who get frightened. I don't like the anxiety makers. I think that's a dishonourable thing to do, to frighten people unnecessarily.
Britain's 7 million cat owners are being urged to keep calm after yesterday's news that a cat had been found to have a disease similar to mad cow disease.
In May 1990, BSE did something alarming.
The Bristol cat was a worry. Here was the BSE agent jumping species and causing disease in another animal species in a way that scrapie hadn't. If BSE could jump into cats, could it also jump into humans?
No cause for alarm at all. This is only one cat death out of 7 million cats in the UK, and there is no reason for cause for concern at all.
The Ministry of Agriculture said, "Don't worry about it, folks."
A spokesman for the British Veterinary Association said the cat wasn't mad, but tipsy.
But I do know that a lot of the scientists were very, very worried indeed.
The cat had had a post-mortem, and there were lesions in its brain similar to the lesions that are found in the brain of cows that are diseased. Now then, here comes with the problem of the sciences. You don't normally have autopsies on cats. Science couldn't tell you whether this was unusual or not.
Today, the body of a third cat suspected of suffering from the disease was sent for tests at the Central Veterinary Laboratory at Weybridge in Surrey.
The Ministry of Agriculture is urging owners whose cats die with mysterious nervous symptoms to take them to one of 20 veterinary investigation centres around the country.
That year, 15 more cats died of feline BSE. And the disease jumped to 14 other species that had eaten infected meat.
By the early 90s, it was clear that this disease was jumping species quite easily. The idea that it was inconceivable that this disease would transmit to humans was not correct. Of course it was conceivable.
If cows get it from the sheep and cats get it from the cows, in that case, why can't humans get it?
The Ministry of Agriculture continued to defend British beef.
Agriculture Minister John Gummer, out and about today, not only bought a burger, but gave his daughter first bite.
I was horrified. We were heading for this precipice. Government was determined, along with the Ministry of Agriculture, to keep on saying there is no risk at all to the population until the first case appeared.
It's always going to be a tragedy when change has to come from a tragedy. Stephen's death was a trigger for lots of things to happen. For the government to sit up and take more notice, for scientists to be able to have a voice, because it was now real. It wasn't a theory anymore, it was real. These photographs are just some of the photos I've kept of Steve. He was always an outgoing child, very self-assured. We always think he was going to go places. BSE felt distance to us at that time. It was something that was happening out there, not in our lives. When the authority was saying to us, beef is safe to eat, we were continuing to eat beef. One of the first signs of Stephen's oncoming illness was when he crashed his mum's car, driving on a perfectly straight piece of road and just veered onto the other side and hit an oncoming truck. We never thought about it being anything to do with an illness. And then he really started to get worse. He was suffering hallucinations, having trouble eating, having trouble walking. And of course we didn't associate this with the staggering cattle we'd seen on TV previously. He wound up in the local psychiatric hospital. The doctors couldn't tell us anything about Steve's condition. They literally didn't know what they were dealing with. They did ask whether they could give him electric shock treatment, which his mum just refused point blank. Eventually the consultant neurologist said that he had a progressive degenerative neurological condition and they couldn't save him. He passed away quite quietly at 9 o'clock on the 21st of May, 1995.
Three weeks after Stephen died, a sample of his brain was sent to researchers at the Creutzfeldt-Jakob Disease Unit in Edinburgh.
CJD is a family of degenerative brain diseases that usually affect the middle-aged and elderly. CJD has been known about certainly since around about 1920 and has been studied in some detail in many countries. It affects widespread brain function, in particular memory, thinking, coordination and balance. They are progressive brain diseases and they are always fatal.
CJD occurs naturally, affecting 1 in a million people, usually the elderly. It targets the brain's nerve cells. On the surface of each cell are millions of proteins, called prion proteins, that help with the brain's normal function. CJD occurs when these prion proteins fold into an abnormal shape and link together to form toxic chains. These chains grow, causing more prion proteins to change shape. Eventually, they become so big, they break apart to form new chains, which spread across the brain, killing nerve cells. The death of these cells creates sponge-like holes in the brain, and the patient's mental functions begin to decline.
In the summer of 1995, the unit saw a single case of what looked like Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease, but in an uncharacteristically young person. And the pathological picture in the brain showed a number of unusual features. If you are finding something unusual in a disease, you have to be very careful before leaping to the conclusion that it's a new disease. You certainly don't want to leap into that conclusion after a single case. You want to collect more of them.
Reports that 2 British teenagers have contracted the human equivalent of mad cow disease is cause for concern but not alarm, according to scientists.
By the time we got to 3, it was 3, bloody hell, something's going on.
Government scientists are investigating another suspected case of incurable brain disease in a cattle farmer whose herd had been infected with BSE.
Suddenly we had 4 or 5, all under 40. That in itself set the alarm bells ringing.
The latest suspected case is from Washington, Tyne and Weir. After she died, her family wrote to the Prime Minister demanding action, but the reply they received was unequivocal. I should make it clear that humans do not get mad cow disease.
And by the time we got to March, it was 8. That was bang, red light comes on. Wow, this is serious shit, right?
Sometime in early 1996, the accumulated evidence here was sufficient that the lead clinician and the lead pathologist went down to the Government Advisory Committee and presented all of the data to them.
Scientists advising the government on mad cow disease are holding emergency talks.
On the 8th of March, the country's leading scientists met to assess the CJD unit's evidence and decide if BSE had finally jumped into humans.
The whole situation is fluid and obviously nothing is written in stone at this point.
The meeting on March the 8th was very scary. We had 8 deaths. They clearly had spongiform change in their brains, but all with the special pathology, which was distinct from regular CJD. They were all under 40, which was very unusual. This almost certainly has to be a completely new disease. This has got to be linked to BSE. The world has changed from this day forward.
Within days, new advice was given to the government.
I remember very clearly reading documents issued by the advisory committee. They said that it was no longer safe to assume that the species barrier protected human health. The biggest issue was how serious is this? How many people could be involved? The decisions that we'd made in government could have terrible consequences. This was a terrible, irreversible tragedy.
The government has consistently told us there is no link between mad cow disease and the human illness Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease. Now, according to reports in several newspapers this morning, it may be about to change its mind.
I stumbled across it, really. I'd arranged to go and see somebody in Whitehall for lunch. Ironically, it was steak and chips. During the lunch, he mentioned that they discovered that mad cow disease could jump species. And there was all hell on in Whitehall because they were terrified about the public reaction, how they're going to handle it. I was a journalist, you realise this is a massive story. It was a scandal. That hunger to get every penny profit out of a carcass. It was almost as if capitalism went mad and literally began to eat itself.
On the 20th of March 1996, there was certainly a sense of stepping into the unknown. I didn't know at that point whether this was going to be the beginning of a major epidemic. We knew perfectly well it could be very bad indeed. I knew that there were huge risks, and I needed to make it clear what those risks were without scaring people.
Statement, Mr. Secretary.
With permission, Madam Speaker, I would like to make a statement about the latest advice which the government has received from the Spongiform Encephalopathy Advisory Committee. The committee has considered the work being done by the government surveillance unit in Edinburgh, which specialises in Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease. This work, which relates to the 10 cases of CJD which have been identified in people aged under 42, has led the committee to conclude that the unit has identified a previously unrecognised and consistent disease pattern. The committee have concluded that the most likely explanation at present is that these cases are linked to exposure to BSE.
For the first time, the government's accepted infected beef is most likely to have killed human beings.
After all the official denials, could Britain now be facing an epidemic of terminal illness?
It's almost as if a dam had burst. Questions were flooding in. Ministers just looked absolutely overwhelmed and swamped.
Have you got it right this time? How many more times are you going to move the goalposts?
The scientific judgment based on the analysis of the evidence will change as it has emerged.
Oh, come along, White. You said on December the 3rd, only 3 months ago, there is no conceivable risk.
Of course, it's a stressful time because you're dealing with the possibility of large-scale human suffering.
Anyone who regularly ate beef between 1986 and 1989 will have eaten numerous meals infected with BSE.
There can't have been a family in the country that night that didn't think about what it had eaten.
I'm 8 months pregnant and I wish it had come to light before now.
It's just too dangerous. The long-term effects, we don't know about the beef we've eaten, let alone now.
I wish I had persuaded my children to avoid beef.
What we didn't know is how many cases would there be.
It's entirely possible that tens of thousands of people may succumb to this disease. I certainly desperately hope not.
Was it going to be really significant so that we would all end up knowing somebody who was going to die of this disease?
I think the numbers we've seen so far in CJD must represent the tip of an iceberg.
Nobody knew what the future of the epidemic was going to be at that point.
The only people with any experience of this new disease were the 5 scientists at the CJD unit in Edinburgh.
The disease was called new variant CJD. This was a new strain that had been identified. We didn't understand its behaviour. Our job was to see the cases and get a description of it that would help people diagnose it. The way in which the surveillance unit works is that if you get notified of somebody, you go and see them. What certainly happened after the reporting of variant CJD is that the number of referrals went up.
In 1996, 10 new cases of variant or VCJD were identified. Almost all were under 30 years of age.
Say hello, Mummy.
Hello. Well, what did I get for Christmas? Clothes, new pair of Adidas Falcon trainers.
Aren't they wonderful? I love
She just said one day, I don't want to wear my shoes to school
them. Asked these for ages.
because I don't feel steady on them coming down the stairs. And I thought, there's something wrong here. So I took her to see this doctor and he examined her, and I could tell, as he's doing the neurological test, I could see where her responses were low. And I thought, you're ill. You know, I can see you're physically ill.
And Pooh's there as well, look.
And we went straight to Bristol then, to the hospital. And they took her down for a lumbar puncture. And then I got the notes and saw the test they'd done, the fact that it wasn't this and it wasn't that. Then it had query, 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 VCJD, just sitting on itself in the middle of a page.
It was difficult seeing the families. These people were young people who were becoming very seriously disabled. Families always wanted to know how long the illness would go on for, how rapidly it progressed, and very difficult to give accurate information about that on an individual basis, let alone when you've only seen a handful of the cases of the disease before.
We took her to America for a couple of weeks. I don't know why. It seems to be one of those things, if somebody's terminally ill, somebody somewhere thinks you should go to Disney World, so we did, you know? And each day, there was something else that Claire lost. She was dribbling, her voice was changing. She got more agitated, more demanding, wanting you there more frightened really, that's what it was.
And what I want, I get.
Why is that, Claire?
I got a poorly brain.
There's no let up from it.
Horrible mother.
She did say to me one day, am I going to die? And I said, what makes you think you're going to die? She said, I feel so unwell.
Oh, it's a sock.
Just the one.
I said, well, the problem is we don't really know what's wrong, so we don't really know what's going to happen. So she said, well, I better plan for if I die then. And we sat down and she talked about who she'd want there, but mostly about who she wouldn't want there. And people jumped on and off the list as time went on. I knew she wasn't going to get better. I knew she was dying. I just didn't think she would actually go and do it. I just thought, because it was too, you just can't think about it. I couldn't think of a time when she wouldn't be there. I wanted to know who to blame. That's what I wanted. Because I wanted to go round and break their legs, really. I wanted to go round and say, you have to come and look at what you've done. That's what I wanted.
The concern in the unit was about the numbers. And if you look at the graph as it was emerging, you saw more and more each year. The disease was identified on the basis of 3 cases initially in 1995, and then as you get into 1996 you can see the numbers rise to 10, 97, 10, and then really quite worryingly the year following that up to 18 cases. There was quite a lot of anxiety because the numbers are substantially increasing, and that certainly raised all sorts of worries about how high this line was going to go. We didn't know for sure how many people had been exposed through diet, and was it possible to, for example, pass this disease on from person to person. If somebody had been infected through diet, could they perhaps infect another person by some means?
In 1998, nobody knew how contagious VCJD could be. Across the country, patients were receiving very different care.
There was a sense of fear about this. Some people were being treated isolated with what's called barrier nursing because they were regarded as having some sort of infection. Some people were just on the open ward and people were just dealing with them in the ordinary way. There was a huge uncertainty amongst healthcare people as to how infectious it was.
Later that year, the Labour government set up the Brown unit in London to establish if VCJD could spread within the human population.
One of our major research priorities at that time was to find out where the infectious agent was in the body in this new disease. We talked to a number of families who'd lost loved ones to variant CJD. We had their consent to remove a wide range of tissues from different parts of the body, including very sensitive tissues like removing eyes from some patients, for example. We looked at every tissue essentially in the human body, kidneys, lungs, muscle, skin. We found that the distribution of the infectious agent was much broader than simply the brain and the spinal cord. We discovered infectious agents in the immune system and the blood, and those two things together were intensely worrying.
The concern about variant CJD in the blood supply is basically this. If one person with variant CJD donates, say, 20 units of blood and they go into 20 other people, you can start to see that it could spread out and become a very sizable epidemic.
All blood used for transfusions is going to be treated first to reduce the risk of passing on new variant CJD, the human form of mad cow disease. The decision follows a recommendation from the government's scientific advisors, who say that white blood cells should be removed from blood as they are most likely to carry any infection.
Over the next 12 months, the government spent £100 million filtering the entire blood bank. But before it was completed, 6,000 people had received contaminated donations. 3 went on to die of the disease.
Scientists monitoring cases of new variant CJD, the human form of mad cow disease, have reported an unusually high increase in the number of deaths.
It was an intensely busy and exhausting time. The whole team were working extremely long hours to care for patients and also push the research forward. It was very deeply moving because you were dealing with young people, sometimes children. There was nothing that we could do to alter the course of the disease. But inevitably, all the families wanted to try every possibility that there might be to prolong their loved one's life.
In 2001, a hope for a cure unexpectedly emerged after a 20-year-old in Merseyside developed VCJD.
Do some maths test for me, Rachel. You ready? I'll give you one. All right. 20, take away 6.
It's 14.
That's it. 12, add 9. Come on.
21.
That's right.
On the day Rachel was diagnosed with CJD, I shouted, she's not going to die. And then the first words I said, apparently, I'm not going to let her die. I don't want any negativity in the house. Anybody who thinks she's going to die, get out of my house now. All the family was looking at each other, thinking he's gone crazy. When I look out now, looking at it, it mustn't look crazy. And I jumped up, they said, Steve, there's no cure for CJD, they've told us. I said, there must be something out there, there's got to be something out there. I would just be on the computer day and night, looking, reading, researching. And I was just desperate to find anybody who could help me to cure our Rachel. And it just led me to Stephen Dealer.
Steve Forber wanted just somebody to tell him that this wasn't the end. He was asking, was there any potential method of treatment? And as it happened, there was an amazing guy in California called Stanley Prusner. He had just published something showing a great effect of one particular drug called quinacrine. I wanted Steve Forber to talk to Prusner in California.
How are you? How are you this morning? Yeah?
When Rachel got the go-ahead for treatment in San Francisco, wow, should have heard me scream. I punched the roof and I was so excited. I thought, this is it now. Jumping for joy. I thought we're going to get you better.
Yeah.
The treatment in San Francisco was quinacrine. They explained to us that it would regenerate certain cells, not all of them, but they said they'd seen in the lab cells starting to come back.
Quinacrine had been around for a number of years as a tablet medicine that had been used for treating things like malaria. Stanley Prisner's team had shown that quinacrine slows down the conversion of the normal prion protein to the abnormal prion protein. Slowing this process down might have benefit in slowing down the progression of the disease. At that stage, it had been done only in cells grown in laboratories, not on whole animals or humans.
Here she comes. Give the wave, Rachel. Wave.
I was made up when she started taking the tablets.
Wave.
I always remember taking the first one. I went, this is the one, Rachel, this is it, babes. Go on, get it down, yeah?
You've been outside who?
Robin Williams' house.
Robin Williams, the actor, yeah? You've been outside his house, haven't you?
Yeah, and Sharon Stone.
And Sharon Stone lived a few doors down.
Yeah. But you're a pervert.
I'm a pervert, am I? Why am I a pervert?
But you look at Sharon Stone in window.
I was looking at Sharon Stone in the window.
You look good.
It looked like it was working. You'd see a movement that she couldn't previously do, and you get excited.
Let's have her walk down. I think it's a little better. I would say that's better than 10 days ago.
You think, come on, Rachel, one more step, one more. And each day you wanted one more step. I did. I truly believe she was getting better.
Baby!
Have a look at here. Oh, look at this, Ray.
When we came back from California, I just thought, we've done this, we've done it. Well, we had a party. I think at this point there, everybody was thinking, you know, it was working. Yeah, 3 days after that, she died. It just dawned on me, yeah. Wow. Yeah, 3 days after that. They said to me, Stephen, we've got to stop giving her the quinacrine. It's burning her liver. We need to up the dose and we can't give her any more. So we had to make a decision to stop giving her the quinacrine. And we did. We stopped it. Yeah. It was all over then.
What makes this disease so lethal is that the prions, the infectious agents that cause these diseases, are completely composed of one of the body's own proteins. Just simply not recognized as being a foreign infectious agent, and so the body lacks effective defenses against it. With conventional viruses and bacteria, it's relatively easy just by using antibodies to destroy them. But because of their unique structure, prions are seriously challenging to target. No one has ever survived CJD. Everybody dies with CJD.
By 2005, clearly the cases, having been steadily increasing and peaked, seemed to be on a downward trend.
A study into the potential spread of CJD, the human form of mad cow disease, has failed to identify a single new case. 3,000 tissue samples were tested and no trace of the disease was found.
We were still concerned even when the numbers were going down, because this was a new disease and we didn't know how it would behave. This initial curve might represent one particular very susceptible part of the population, and that other people with the illness might appear later. We didn't fully understand whether there were going to be further waves of illness.
In 2005, nobody knew how long people could incubate VCJD before the disease would show. The only clue came from a strange disease called kuru, which was discovered in the 1950s, affecting a tribe of cannibals in Papua New Guinea.
Kuru was a disease very similar to CJD. It affected an isolated community in the highlands of Papua New Guinea and decimated that population. It was the practice in those communities for relatives to consume their deceased loved one, but unfortunately that led to transmission of this lethal disease in the community.
Kuru was passed on when people ate infected human brain. When they developed kuru and died, they were also eaten, and so the lethal epidemic spread.
In 1996, we started a field project in Papua New Guinea to study the end of the kuru epidemic. And I used to go out when patients had been identified in the community by our surveillance program. And we discovered incubation periods of the disease exceeding 50 years, which was an extraordinary length of time.
John Collinge's team found that patients were developing kuru half a century after eating infected brains. It turned out that the incubation period for all prion diseases was determined by one single factor: genetics. The brain proteins affected by prion disease contain genetic material that we inherit from our parents. Each parent passes down either an M form or a V form of this genetic material. So everyone carries either a combination of M and V, or two Vs, or two Ms. These combinations affect how long people incubate the disease.
We found that the MVs were the ones that had the extremely long incubation periods, often more than 50 years. We had a concern from the start that this may also be the case with variant CJD, because everybody we saw with variant CJD was MM.
We didn't know whether that meant only MM people would be affected, which seemed a bit unlikely, or more likely that MV and VV people would be affected, but at a later time.
Half of the British population are MV genotype, but it wasn't known if they could develop VCJD until 2009.
The human form of mad cow disease, VCJD, is regarded as a disease of the 1990s. But there is a new victim, and crucially, not of the same genetic disposition as the 164 people killed by VCJD in the first wave.
One day we received a visit from 4 doctors from the prion clinic in London. One of the doctors told us that Grant was an MV gene type, a different gene type from everybody else in the world that had died of variant CJD. Didn't really mean much at that particular time because I didn't really know what they were talking about, because obviously I'm a taxi driver, I'm not a specialist, I'm not a doctor, I'm not a professor of science of any type. We were only at that particular time worried about Grant, because his brain cells were basically dying one by one.
Grant Goodwin was the first MV victim, suggesting a new chapter in the VCJD epidemic.
He was a jacky lad, he just loved fun. That's another one, he's 21st. The policewoman, she's a stripper.
Got him handcuffed.
She's got him handcuffed now.
Oh, and my mum and dad was at that party too. My dad's like, oh, what is she doing?
Still got a cheeky smile, but a big giant, big gentle giant.
Yeah, that was his last t-shirt, pretty small, because he had lost that much weight. It's never been washed. I wouldn't wash that smell away. No. If I've had a bad day, I can always come in and just lift that out. I just wish I could see him in it once more.
After Grant passed away, I sat down at my computer, and that's when you find out about the incubation periods of the various gene types. The incubation of Grant's MV gene type is 30 to 40 to 50 years. So as far as I'm led to believe, there is a second wave just round the corner of this illness. And the people that are incubating this haven't even got a clue that they're incubating it. It does scare me. Yeah, it scares me immensely. I could be incubating this. Margaret could be incubating it. You could be incubating it. We don't know. You'll never know until something happens.
Four years ago, a second MV death occurred. The CJD unit is still monitoring for any new cases.
So this is the room in the unit where we keep some of the samples from some of the people who died of variant CJD. There have been 178 deaths so far. There's still so much uncertainty about this disease, and one of the things that is uncertain is how many people in the United Kingdom are silently infected. And at the moment, I have to say, we're simply not sure. Every prediction that we have suggests that there are going to be further cases. This is obviously a tragic illness, not least because the origins of this disease were arguably preventable.
This basically says, my son Grant, in memory, murdered by greed and corruption, 1978 to 2009.
The greatest tragedy of variant CJD is that this is not a natural disease. It's an epidemic which we created. If the agriculture industry hadn't fed animals meat and bone meal, if the food processors hadn't scraped every last morsel of flesh off an animal, and if the Ministry of Agriculture, Fisheries and Food hadn't prioritized the farming industry over food safety, then all of the people who died from this disease would still be alive. That's the real tragedy.
I've got a list, a hit list. At Christmas, I remind them all by email, whether they open them or not, that this is my daughter. I send a photograph, I say when she died, and I say, and your actions did this. When you sit down to your Christmas lunch, you remember we sit down with an empty space because of the choices you made. So when you make your next choice in Parliament, or your next choice in business, make sure it's a good one, because they have consequences.